Chapter 1. Before being married into the Eastern Palace, I already knew that by the Crown Prince's side, there was a flower of eloquence. She was skilled in the arts of zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting, well-versed in military strategies, yet willingly served as a close maid to the Crown Prince. On my wedding night, which should have been the night of consummation, the Crown Prince instead held her hand as they gazed at the moon atop the Eastern Palace for the entire night. I neither cried nor made a scene, simply dedicating myself to fulfilling the duties of a crown princess. I exhausted my heart and mind to bring them together, watching as they abandoned the empire to wander the four seas. I love power, I love wealth, with or without a husband, it matters not to me. Yet in the end, the Crown Prince regretted it. I come from the young bloodline family of the Red Plains. Both my grandaunt and great-grandaunt were once empresses. I am the eldest legitimate daughter of this generation. If no unforeseen events occurred, I was destined to enter the Eastern Palace as the Crown Princess. The noble families are intricately intertwined. Daughters of the family, upon coming of age, must marry into other noble families to strengthen the clan's status. From a young age, I understood that for women, if they became infatuated with love, they might, if fortunate, meet someone worthy. Otherwise, they would endure a life of endless despair. I once heard my grandaunt recount a story. Years ago, the one destined for the Eastern Palace was another great-grandaunt. However, she fell in love with a poor scholar and severed ties with her family to live her own life. But later, that scholar abandoned her. In the end, she could only return to the young family while pregnant. A noble daughter of a prestigious family, born into privilege, was deceived both emotionally and physically by a poor scholar. From then on, that great-grandaunt lost all hope. Her younger sister was then married into the Eastern Palace and enjoyed a life of splendor and wealth. Everything that should have belonged to her became her sister's. Unable to bear the disparity, she ultimately renounced the world and sought refuge in a Buddhist temple. My grandaunt said, "Love is the most illusory thing in life, only wealth and power in hand truly matter." Even my mother, who was once a childhood sweetheart of my father, secretly said, "If your father were not a member of the young bloodline of the Red Plains, I would never have married him." When I reached the age of maturity, an imperial decree of marriage was sent to the young manor. I calmly prepared for the wedding, as my younger sisters gathered around, chattering excitedly. Elder sister will become the crown princess upon entering the Eastern Palace. How majestic. It's just a pity that aunt was injured while saving his majesty, so the crown prince wasn't born of her. However, the crown prince deeply respects her and will naturally cherish the young ladies of our young family. The third sister, who had a boyish personality, pouted at this and remarked, "I think we should feel sorry for elder sister instead. I heard that years ago, when the son family of the Minister of Rights was confiscated, the Crown Prince rescued their daughter and even arranged for her to enter the Eastern Palace as his close maidservant." As soon as the third sister finished speaking, the room fell into silence. Everyone looked at each other, then turned their eyes to me. I smiled and said, "It's fine. I've long known there's already a flower who understands his heart by the Crown Prince's side. Elder sister, don't you feel upset about it?" I gazed toward the majestic imperial city and replied, "What Diana Young desires is power and the everlasting prosperity of the Young family. If he has given his love to someone else, then the power shall belong to me." On the wedding day, Charles Lee and I knelt to pay homage to heaven and earth. When it came time for the couple's bow, he refused to lower his head, instead staring intently at Vivian's son, who stood not far away. It was only after a discreet reminder from the Ministry of Rights eunuch that Charles Lee reluctantly completed the ceremony with me. I sat in Morning Sun Hall within the Eastern Palace, and Nurse Martha, who was tending to me, let out a soft sigh. Just now, His Highness the Crown Prince kept looking at Miss Sunday. This old servant even saw her eyes red with tears, ready to fall. Maid Xiaohong chimed in, "Who wouldn't notice? Crying like that at someone else's wedding, it's truly unlucky." All of us servants saw the Crown Prince's expression just now, he felt so much pity for her. In the bridal chamber, the dragon and phoenix candles flickered brightly. I dismissed all the palace attendants. The room turned silent, save for the cheerful crackling of the candle wicks. I removed the red veil, took off the phoenix crown, opened the window, and saw the crown prince holding Vivian's son on the roof of the main hall of the Eastern Palace, gazing at the moon. Under the full moon high in the sky, I suddenly felt the faint stirrings of affection from my childhood and the recent illusions about him dissolve entirely. It was as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over me, leaving me unusually clear-headed. I even began to feel fortunate that, from the start, he had never pretended with me. When love is cast aside, and only the family and my future remain in my heart, I can walk much farther. I knew I was the one who came between the crown prince and Vivian's son, and I fully understood that a woman is powerless as she could only rely on the crown prince. But being born into an aristocratic family, I had no right to decide my marriage. I could only use this union to climb higher and achieve everything I desired. Under the bright moonlight, with the lovers' whispers and the flickering candlelight in the bedchamber, I looked at the wedding robe I wore and the phoenix crown veil placed beside me. My heart felt like the moon sinking in the west. Once the moon sets, dawn will soon break. I do not wish to be the lingering moon between lovers and poetry, I want to be the phoenix soaring above the sun. Even if it means solitude, I must shine brightly, even if I am burned along the way, I will accept it willingly. Gazing at their silhouettes, I murmured, Diana Young, allow yourself to feel sad just a little on your wedding night. I must take control of my destiny, always resorting to any means necessary. If I pity another woman and give her the man, then I must ensure she is grateful to me for the rest of her life. A single tear falls onto my hand, and my sorrow vanishes in an instant. Chapter 2. Charles Lee and Vivian's son spent an entire night gazing at the moon. This incident spread throughout the palace, causing a stir among everyone. Vivian's son was summoned by the Empress for questioning. Charles Lee, feeling a bit anxious, came to find me. He glared at me angrily, Diana Young, you have no feelings for her whatsoever. It's only been a day since we got married, and you've already gone to your aunt to accuse Vivian. Truly, you are cruel. Vivian is frail and delicate, if anything happens to her, I will make you pay. I fastened the golden hairpin into my bun and turned to meet his gaze, directly. If I hadn't reported it, would the crown prince have apologized to me? He seemed taken aback by my words, only managing to respond stiffly, you truly are incomprehensible. I am the crown prince, how could I possibly apologize to you? I signaled with my eyes to Nurse Martha, who immediately understood and went to summon a few of Vivian's son's close maidservants. Little Hong spoke up, no one from Morning Sun Hall left the Eastern Palace today. Both Nurse Martha and I stayed by the crown princess's side the entire time. As for you all, I saw you sneaking out earlier. Could it be that you went to Tranquil Harmony Palace to whisper intentionally, so the Empress would hear about this? The maidservants, already terrified, remained silent but were clearly flustered. Charles Lee continued to defend Vivian's son. Vivian is so kind-hearted, how could she possibly do such a thing? He let out a faint smile, now that His Highness, the Crown Prince, is furious and came to me to demand answers, feeling even more heartbroken for her. Hasn't her goal been achieved? Nanny Martha chimed in, these people are acting so panicked, they must have done something shady to create discord between the Crown Princess and the Crown Prince. Why not send them to secluded Haven Palace to work as cleaning maids as punishment? At that moment, the maids burst into tears and confessed, it was Sister Vivian who told us to spread this rumor throughout the palace. She said that by doing so, if the Empress punishes her, she wouldn't direct her anger at His Highness, the Crown Prince. I suppressed the urge to roll my eyes. Charles Lee looked momentarily stunned, why would Vivian be so foolish? He hurriedly prepared to leave, but I immediately said, Your Highness, you haven't apologized to me yet. Fine. I was wrong to you. Is that enough? Watching his figure rush off, I could only find it laughable. A future monarch, loving someone to the point of losing all sense of right and wrong, will inevitably be pulled down from the throne sooner or later. If someone else were to do it, wouldn't it be better if I took matters into my own hands? I walked along the narrow path between the palace walls, and the palace attendants along the way secretly glanced at me, scrutinizing. When I arrived at the Empress's quarters, I saw Charles Lee standing with Vivian's son, being punished in the courtyard. Under the scorching sun, Vivian's son's face was pale, but Charles Lee appeared resolute and unwavering. What a pair of love as deep as the ocean. Seeing me, Vivian's son lowered her head in embarrassment. I looked at Charles Lee and said, "Your Highness, as newlyweds, you should present tea together, to honor the Emperor and Empress." Vivian's son softly added, "Your Highness, please go. Don't upset His Majesty and Her Majesty because of me." The Empress Dowager, seated on the Phoenix throne, only felt reassured when she saw my lack of emotion. His Majesty sat for a while, before taking Charles Lee into the southern study room to discuss state affairs. I remained in the chamber with the Empress Dowager, gazing outside at Vivian's sundae. The Empress Dowager remarked, "You truly know how to remain composed. I want the Crown Prince's affection, but what I truly desire is power." The Empress Dowager smiled. "I thought you would be upset for a few days." "Why would I? Doesn't Aunt think that a man who loses control, or worse, opposes both you and His Majesty for the sake of a woman, would make the empire a joke if he were to inherit it?" The Empress Dowager naturally understood the implication in my words and replied, "Diana, you are clever. For the things you cannot yet bring yourself to do, I can handle them for you. Aunt, let her go. In the future, there's no need to be too harsh on her. Everything she does is merely out of self-preservation. I don't wish to become her enemy, but I am forced to calculate against her. It's better to leave some dignity intact for both sides so that outsiders won't think Diana Young is nothing but a weakling who only knows how to complain when wronged." Leaving the Empress's palace, Vivian's son quietly followed behind me. Suddenly, she rushed forward and said, "Consort, if Vivian were not the daughter of a criminal, if I hadn't been saved by the Crown Prince from secluded Haven Palace, perhaps everything would be different today." I wasn't angry. Instead, I gently tucked a few stray strands of hair behind her ear. "Vivian, don't hope to provoke me. You should know that for things I don't care about, no underhanded schemes can sway me. Moreover, I'm aware that the Crown Prince is watching us from not far away. Your tricks would be better spent focusing on him." I turned to leave, but she still didn't give up and rushed in front of me again. "Consort, I was wrong." I immediately stepped back, then turned and ran away, leaving Vivian's son standing there alone, confused in the wind. As I rounded the corner, I saw Charles Lee, his face pale. "She apologized to you, so why did you run?" "I was afraid she might go mad, either banging her head or throwing herself against the wall. Then you'd pity her and unjustly blame me for it." Charles Lee was stunned. I bowed to excuse myself and quickly left. Nanny Martha said, "Consort, even if you discipline Miss Sun now, it wouldn't be too much. She's just a maid. Does she truly think she can rise above the Eastern Palace?" I picked up a small vase in the chamber and smiled. A vase, of course, has its own value. Arrange a few flowers in it, and it still pleases the eye. I won't waste my time troubling a maid. After all, she's not yet strong enough to shake my position. Chapter 3. In the courtyard of the Eastern Palace, I saw Charles Lee holding Vivian's son as they passed through the grand gate, followed by an entourage of eunuchs and palace maids. Peering through the small window, I noticed him hastily ordering someone to summon the royal physician. Standing under the scorching sun for several hours would naturally make the Crown Prince worry about Vivian's son's health. Otherwise, this move would become a mistake, causing her to suffer in vain. In the game of vying for favor, nothing is more effective than a man's pity. But I, Diana Young, have no interest in this game. Nanny Martha, invite the supervising ladies from the Empress's and the Dowager Empress's palaces to the Eastern Palace to oversee the royal physician's diagnosis and treatment of Vivian's sundae. Whether prescribing or preparing medicine, there must be witnesses. Additionally, inform the eunuchs, palace maids, and guards in Morning Sun Hall that for the next few days, anyone entering or leaving the Eastern Palace must report to Eunuch Tran. I have no interest in being falsely accused, nor do I have the patience to play games with her. Nanny Martha nodded in acknowledgement. Suddenly, dark clouds gathered outside, strong winds blew, and heavy rain poured down. In Floral Grace Hall, a window was abruptly flung open by the wind. Charles Lee was feeding medicine to Vivian's son when her cold gaze swept through the window frame, landing in my direction. In the courtyard, raindrops pelted the water in the basin, creating small ripples, while a few lotus flowers swayed in the wind. Leaning against the window, I relished the serene moment, sipping tea, reading a book, and occasionally enjoying some fruit. The sound of the rain pattered on, and on the other side of the window, someone was putting on a performance just for me. It was utterly delightful. However, as I was engrossed in my enjoyment, Charles Lee suddenly caught sight of me through the window. Charles Lee appeared somewhat flustered, with more than a hint of anger. For half a month, Vivian's son couldn't find an opportunity to frame me, while Charles Lee grew increasingly unable to understand me. Every time he faced me, there was always a hint of scrutiny in his gaze. When his compassion for Vivian's son reached its peak, he decided to make her a concubine. He searched my face for signs of anger, but the only thing he could find was 7 parts mockery. In the Eastern Palace, everyone thought I should be furious, that I should confront Vivian Sunday. The entire imperial court seemed to be enveloped in an atmosphere of hostility. Charles Lee began to guard against me, only to discover that I never crossed the line. I never take action against women, especially not women who survive solely by relying on men. When Vivian's son rose from a maidservant to become a concubine of the Eastern Palace, I knew the confrontation between her and me would begin. But the play I wanted to perform was not one of fighting over Charles Lee. Because I intended to give Charles Lee entirely to her. I wanted them to fall deeply in love, to grow weary of life within the confines of the palace, and to yearn for the lives of the common people they so admired. I wanted to turn Charles Lee into an ordinary prince, someone who could never ascend to the throne. But first, to achieve that, I needed to give birth to an heir for this dynasty, to raise a child without relying on its father. I didn't want to spend my life as the crown princess or empress, endlessly entangled in the struggles of the inner palace. If I were to act, I wanted to become the regent empress dowager, ruling from behind the curtain. I wanted the daughters of the young family to no longer have to marry into noble families they disliked solely for the sake of alliances. I wanted the young family to no longer need to rely on their daughters to uphold their reputation. I admit, I am extremely arrogant and utterly selfish. Years ago, when I heard the story of my great-grandmother becoming a nun, I didn't feel pity for her. I only felt regret, for her and for all the daughters of the young family. If one day, I, Diana Young, could shine like the sun at its zenith, I would ensure that the young family no longer needed to depend on their daughters to sustain the family. I wanted the young family to become the strongest clan, where both sons and daughters could enjoy supreme freedom. And the prerequisite for all of this was that I must ascend to the highest position. The day Vivian's son was bestowed her title, Charles Lee, and I sat in the main hall of the Eastern Palace. He looked heartbroken as the woman he had long loved knelt before me to present tea. He worried I might pour the hot tea onto her face, but I simply sipped it slowly, and even gifted her numerous jewels. My restrained expression left Charles Lee unable to discern my intentions. He held Vivian's son's hand tightly. Everyone assumed I should feel anger or jealousy, but I only spoke softly, "Congratulations to the crown prince for winning such a beauty." His eyes were filled with confusion. When I returned to Morning Sun Hall, he unexpectedly came to find me. Sitting down, he silently observed me. "You know, I understand that you've endured many grievances recently. I see you as a kind-hearted person. Please live harmoniously with Vivian from now on. I will also treat you better in the future so you won't have to suffer anymore." I suddenly smiled. Diana still remembers meeting the crown prince in our youth. Back then, you were being chased by a wild beast, and it was I who shot it down to save you. I once thought the crown prince would remember that, but these days I've realized you seem to have forgotten. He froze for a moment. "Indeed, I have wronged you. Whatever you wish for, I will grant it. But Vivian is innocent. You are now the rightful wife of the Eastern Palace. I hope you won't be harsh on her." I gave a faint smile. Your Highness seems very afraid that I might harm Vivian. That's not what I meant. I suddenly stepped closer to him, tugging at his sleeve. Diana Young is the eldest daughter, with many younger sisters in the family. I grew up with them. I know the Crown Prince doesn't like me, nor do I expect him to love me, but Diana Young is the Crown Princess, and I must think of the royal family. If the Crown Prince allows me to bear a son, I will not harbor any improper thoughts. What do you mean by improper thoughts? I bit my lip and lowered my head, for example, hoping to gain the Crown Prince's love and heart. Charles Lee's face flushed red as he hurriedly stood up. Diana Young, you are truly shameless. Watching him quickly leave the room, I murmured, the weak are devoured by the strong. Don't blame me for being calculating. If one doesn't look out for themselves, heaven and earth will turn against them. Vivian's son wasn't a particularly difficult person to investigate. I just didn't expect that besides the Crown Prince, there was someone else who also felt compassion for her. And that someone was the youngest Imperial Guard commander, Victor Wade, who frequently assisted Vivian's son in the palace. In fact, her escape from secluded Haven Palace was due to his pleading with the Crown Prince. While I was bathing, Emily had already uncovered everything. The Wade family and the Sun family have long-standing ties. Years ago, Victor Wade was even engaged to Vivian Sunday. Later, when the Sun family fell, Victor Wade even knelt in the courtyard, begging his father to help. I let out a cold laugh. The Sun family committed treason. Back then, while transporting provisions to the front line, Vivian's son's father embezzled a significant amount of silver, delaying military supplies and causing tens of thousands of soldiers to starve to death on the battlefield. Such a crime, yet the Crown Prince and a commander of the Imperial Guards still protect her. How amusing. Emily seethed with anger. My elder brother also died in the battle at Yenming Pass, Lin Prefecture. If not for the scum of the Sun family, he wouldn't have had to die. I think Vivian's son is selfish too. Now that she's climbed up to the Crown Prince, she'll definitely aim even higher. After bathing, I sat by the window reading a book. Suddenly, I felt as if someone was stealthily hiding beneath my window. Holding my breath, I leapt out the window, only to see a man dressed in black darting onto the rooftop. Emily tossed me my sword, and I grabbed it to chase after him. The man occasionally glanced back, and I threw a concealed weapon, a silver needle laced with poison, striking his back. The poison took effect, and he fell from a height. Nanny Martha had already summoned the guards of the Eastern Palace. When they saw I had captured the man, everyone was stunned. Your Highness, please don't handle this yourself. Allow this servant to remove his mask. I stepped on the man's chest and used my sword to lift his mask. Well, what a coincidence. Commander, could you explain why you're lurking outside my morning sun hall in the middle of the night, dressed in such attire? Could it be that I, a crown princess, have committed some crime that requires your personal investigation? Victor Wade turned his head away, and the guards were at a loss. Charles Lee and Vivian's son arrived belatedly. He held Vivian's son's hand and looked at me holding the sword. Diana Young, what exactly happened? I was reading when I suddenly noticed someone sneaking around, so I chased after him with my sword. I didn't expect it to be the commander. Vivian's son's expression changed. She disregarded everything and immediately knelt down. Please, Crown Princess, spare the commander's life. Charles Lee frowned, and I suddenly laughed. Lady Sun, there's an intruder in the palace, and it turns out to be the commander of the Imperial Guards. Whether to kill him or interrogate him for information is not something I can decide. Or is it that, in your heart, the lives of others are less important than the commander's life? Tears streamed down Vivian's son's face as she clutched Charles Lee's robe tightly. Your Highness, please say something. Charles Lee reported to the Emperor, suggesting that Victor Wade be temporarily detained. He glanced at my sword, a glint of light flashing in his eyes. I never expected the Crown Princess to possess such formidable martial skills, capable of capturing the top expert of Great Chu. I shook my head lightly. It's because I used hidden weapons. I'm a woman, not a gentleman. Using hidden weapons to protect myself is nothing to be ashamed of. I brushed past him and Vivian's son, returning to my chambers. The nursemaid, Martha, looked worried. Could it be that consort's son sent Victor Wade here? We'll find out tomorrow. Martha broke into a cold sweat. My lady, if she intends to take your life, will you still hold on to your principle of not killing her? Before her words had fully settled, Charles Lee stepped into my chambers. He looked at me. You must have been frightened today. I will stay here to watch over you. I replied calmly. The one who was frightened wasn't me, but Vivian. I heard Victor Wade and Vivian's son grew up together. After what happened today, she must be heartbroken. Your Highness should stay by consort's son's side instead. He spoke with difficulty. Can this matter be resolved quietly? Tomorrow, I will report to the Emperor that I personally asked the commander to help guard the Eastern Palace. Did guarding require wearing night attire? Diana Young, consider this a debt I owe you. Let this matter rest here. I suddenly let out a mocking laugh. Your Highness, if I were to die, would you simply let everything pass like this? But nothing has happened to you. Diana Young has trained in martial arts since childhood, to strengthen her body, to protect herself, and to protect others. If I were defenseless and harmed in secret, Your Highness, would you still think nothing was wrong? Or are you just afraid of implicating Lady Sun instead? He hesitated, and I continued on my own. Let me guess, she must have cried to you, saying how difficult life is in the Eastern Palace, and Victor Wade acted out of anger on her behalf, right? So, a few tears from Vivian's son are more precious to you than Diana Young's life. He looked bewildered. That's not what I mean, Diana. Don't say such things. You are my crown princess. How could I ever belittle you? Suddenly, my eyes welled with tears. But Your Highness, once words are spoken, they're like water spilled on the ground. I've always fulfilled my duties and never harmed the one you love. Now someone wants to harm me, and I never expected my life to be so cheap in your eyes. He had never seen me cry before and seemed flustered, hurriedly wiping away my tears. I always thought you were strong, someone who wouldn't cry easily. Don't cry anymore. Let's pretend I never said anything. Chapter 4. Charles Lee stayed in my room all night. He lay on the divan near the window. I knew he didn't sleep, because his mind had already begun to crack slightly, because of me. At dawn, Victor Wade was stripped of his position and punished, yet he didn't utter a word about the reason. What a fool. When I arrived at the prison, his entire body was soaked in blood, but his gaze remained resolute. Victor Wade, you dared to covet the crown prince's woman, how bold of you. He glanced at me briefly. I said, you once had a bright future, and now you've ruined it all for a woman. Do you not regret it? His voice was hoarse. What do you know? A vicious woman like you, who delights in stealing what belongs to others, isn't even worth a single finger of hers. We're no different, Commander. You're not much nobler than I am. Coveting the crown prince's woman makes you no better than a filthy rat in the sewers. Not wanting to waste more time, I decisively added, today, I'll spare your life. Remember, it's because of my generosity that I let you live, not because I fear you two lowly insects. As I left the prison, Emily looked surprised. Wouldn't killing him have been more satisfying? Looking at Charles Lee's carriage in the distance, I replied indifferently, I want Charles Lee to always remember that he owes me. Moreover, if he and Vivian's son ever leave the palace, Victor Wade will no longer restrain himself just because Charles is the crown prince. Emily quickly understood. You truly are thoughtful, always planning 3 steps ahead. Charles Lee stood beside the carriage, while Vivian's son appeared somewhat embarrassed. I bowed slightly and spoke gently. I have already pleaded with the Emperor, asking him to spare the commander's life. As Charles Lee seemed about to say something, I walked past him and boarded my carriage. Suddenly, he let go of Vivian's son's hand and rushed toward me. You've never considered anyone's life to be worthless. Diana, I will remember your kindness, and Vivian will also be grateful to you. I looked directly into his eyes. In mine, there was only him. I spoke earnestly, everything Diana has done is solely to ensure the crown prince's peace of mind. not to seek gratitude from anyone. With that, I pulled the curtain shut, leaving the crown prince standing there in a daze. Emily lifted the window curtain and glanced out. His Highness is still standing there, unmoving. Write a letter to my family, asking my mother to send the best prenatal medicine to the palace. As expected, Charles Lee felt indebted to me. He stayed in my chambers for several consecutive days, and I had to suppress my disgust, always pretending to be cheerful and indulging him. Even though Vivian's son stayed in the neighboring hall day after day, playing sorrowful melodies on her zither, he remained unmoved. However, there were moments when he would stand outside the window, lost in thought, gazing into the distance. Seeing this, I coldly remarked, "Your Highness is the crown prince, yet you cannot make the one you love your rightful wife. It must be painful, isn't it? Go see her." In the end, he could no longer suppress his longing. Both the emperor and the empress pressured him, and even he himself created pressure within. His regret toward Vivian's son grew deeper and deeper. Some time later, the royal physician diagnosed me as pregnant, and I breathed a sigh of relief. Vivian's son became even more withdrawn. The news of my pregnancy was like a blade, cutting deep into her heart, causing her excruciating pain. When she came to pay her respects to me, her face grew increasingly pale. That day, I dismissed everyone, looked at her, and said, "Vivian's son, do you wish to live a life with only you and Charles Lee?" She looked at me, bewildered. "I don't understand what the crown princess means." "You're right. You were once a noble lady of a prestigious family. If your family hadn't fallen, perhaps the Eastern Palace would have a different mistress by now. But in the future, the Eastern Palace will welcome many other women. Even if Charles Lee ascends the throne as emperor, life won't be as carefree as you imagine. Are you willing to share the man you love with others?" Vivian's son's eyes reddened. "I only wish to live peaceful days by his side, but he is the crown prince, what can I do?" I looked straight into her eyes. "Vivian's son, you are intelligent. You know how to exploit a man's regrets, otherwise, you wouldn't have made it from secluded Haven Palace to where you are today. In the past, you were also a renowned talent in the capital, skilled in the arts and even knowledgeable in military strategy. I believe you understand that one cannot have both the fish and the bear's paw." Vivian's son asked, "Are you suggesting that the crown prince and I leave the palace?" I didn't answer, but she had already discerned the truth. "Why?" "Because you and I were never enemies. Here, we cannot control our own destinies. But whether the choice is light or heavy, a decision must be made." Since that day, Vivian's son fell gravely ill, her health deteriorating with each passing moment. Her gaze at me carried a mix of scrutiny and confusion. The more I noticed Charles Lee caring for her, the freer I felt. Occasionally, Charles Lee would visit Morning Sun Hall. As he observed my belly growing larger, the furrow between his brows deepened. He often frowned, staring into the distance. "Diana, life in this palace is truly dull," he said, repeating these words with increasing frequency. I reported to my aunt, requesting her to arrange a consort selection for the Eastern Palace, as it couldn't possibly have only 2 concubines. Currently, His Majesty had only one prince, Charles Lee, a rare heir, which made His Majesty anxious. Seeing that I was pregnant yet still mindful of the greater good, His Majesty rewarded me with many precious treasures and silks. Both inside and outside the palace, people praised the daughter of the young family as someone destined to embody the virtues of an empress, someone with foresight. But only I knew that the small affection and love I once had for him had shattered on our wedding night. Without care, there is no jealousy. When Vivian's son learned of the consort selection for the Eastern Palace, her condition worsened. Yet, she still dragged her frail body to see me. "Crown Princess, do you truly have no desire to compete with me for Charles Lee?" I stroked my belly and shook my head. "What I truly want, I've already achieved." She sneered. "You only want a child, is that it?" I remained silent. Vivian's son laughed bitterly. "I admit it, I'm on the verge of losing my mind. If it were just you and me in this Eastern Palace, it would be bearable. But if other women arrive, if they also bear his children, I'll go mad. He once told me that in this lifetime, there would only be one person for him. He said that. I glanced at her. Lately, the Crown Prince has often said a few words to me. He says there's nothing interesting in this palace. Vivian, in this palace, no one can help you. Only you can help yourself. Before leaving, it seemed she had resolved something within herself. Diana Young, I once thought you'd strike against me when you became Crown Princess. But I didn't expect you to do nothing at all. I've said it before, we are not enemies. We are merely people unable to control our own fates. Whether born into an aristocratic family or destined to be Crown Prince, there are always unavoidable constraints. After she left, Charles Lee stayed by her side for several consecutive days. I have 3 months left until the due date, and the consort has specifically postponed the Eastern Palace selection by 3 months. That's enough for me to peacefully assume the role of Crown Princess and watch them grow weary of palace life day by day. I'll guide them toward the perfect ending I've orchestrated, all without staining my hands with a single drop of blood. Vivian's son told me that Charles Lee has begun to entertain the idea of taking her away from the palace, though his resolve is not yet firm. I asked my father to instruct his disciples to submit a petition to the court, accusing the Sun family of crimes and demanding the demotion of her position as concubine. After all, in 3 months, when the noble ladies of the aristocracy enter the Eastern Palace, would they not be forced to stand on equal footing with the daughter of a criminal? Immediately, the palace was stirred with covert unrest. Vivian's son, frail and weak, was given a few prescriptions from me that caused her body to sweat excessively and grow even more debilitated. She took the medicine daily, but her condition worsened. Eventually, Charles Lee made up his mind to take her out of the imperial city. They planned to fake their deaths in a great fire on the day of my childbirth, while everyone would be too preoccupied to notice. But Charles Lee had no idea that everything was within my and Vivian's son's calculations. As my body grew heavier, he often looked at me with a guilty expression and quietly said, "Diana, you will surely be a wonderful mother. Our child will undoubtedly grow up to be strong and virtuous. The royal physician has confirmed that your pulse indicates you're carrying a boy." I gently caressed my belly. I only need this child. I desire nothing else. At that moment, Charles Lee's eyes were filled with remorse. During those 3 months, he wrote numerous handwritten letters, as if pouring out the emotions of a father to his unborn child. I merely observed his every action with cold indifference. The day before I gave birth, he organized a birthday party for me. In the morning Sun Hall, he asked, "Diana, if one day you were no longer here, would you feel sad?" I simply replied, "I will raise our child to grow up strong. I won't feel sad." That night, he gently embraced me from behind. "Diana Young, in the end, I failed to treat you well." I pretended to be sound asleep, but inside, my heart was overflowing with joy. Finally, I could push them out of my life for good. Chapter 5. The next day, I felt the amniotic fluid had broken. Midwives and palace attendants came in and out constantly. Wet Nurse Martha and Emily kept encouraging me, while my mother and sisters waited outside the chamber. But then, Floral Grace Hall suddenly caught fire, the flames so massive they could be seen from the windows of Morning Sun Hall. I am Diana Young, but my other name is not as gentle as the names of other noble ladies. When I was born, my father sought a fortune-teller to predict my fate. The fortune-teller said my destiny lacked fire, so I was named Diana Young, and my courtesy name became Four Flames. The fire at Floral Grace Hall, much like the fire in my name, began to rage. When that fire was extinguished, my life would turn to a new chapter. My life would never lack this flame again. Thinking of this, I screamed and mustered all my strength, followed by the newborn's cry echoing throughout Morning Sun Hall. When I woke up, His Majesty had found a letter in the Crown Prince's study. They had planned to fake their deaths and leave the palace during the fire. His Majesty initially intended to punish them harshly, but upon seeing the child crying loudly in my arms, he burned the letter to ashes under the candlelight. Summon my decree, Crown Prince Charles Lee and consort Vivian's son perished in the Floral Grace Hall fire. The entire nation shall mourn. The imperial city was adorned with white silk, and my son was named Crown Prince. From then on, I no longer needed to vie for favor with anyone, and my hands remained unstained by blood. It was they who paved the way for me and my son to ascend to the pinnacle of this dynasty. As the Crown Prince's coffin left the city, I followed behind, playing the role of a grieving widow before the world. Perhaps Charles Lee and Vivian's son were somewhere among the crowd, silently watching me. I had given him entirely to her, while I gained what I desired most, unparalleled power and wealth. The year my son turned 6, His Majesty passed away. My son ascended the throne, my sister-in-law became the Grand Empress Dowager, and I became the Empress Dowager of Great Zhou. I served as regent, helping my son stabilize the court. That year, I was only 22 years old. The young family reached its peak and no longer needed to sacrifice daughters to strengthen the family through marriage. By the time my son turned 13, realizing that the young emperor had grown strong and wise enough, I handed over authority to him. Nanny Martha suddenly brought news, "Your Majesty, Charles Lee is in the capital, requesting an audience with you." I casually played with my nails. "The man has been dead for years, what is there to meet about?" Nanny Martha persisted, "If your Majesty refuses to meet him, he will find a way to approach the emperor." Taking advantage of the night, I rode a carriage to a villa on the outskirts of the capital. After many years apart, Charles Lee had become haggard, his figure thinner than before. Vivian's son was not by his side. When he saw me, he intended to pull me into an embrace, but I immediately stepped back. "What do you want from me?" He looked a bit awkward. "Apologies. Back then, I faked my death, wanting to live a peaceful life with Vivian outside the palace." I nodded. "I know. The late emperor once found the letter you left in the study. I also know that after leaving the capital, you went to Hangzhou, Fujian, and then Yunnan." He froze in place. "How do you know?" I looked at him coldly, "Because I was the one who made Vivian's son evoke your compassion, leading you to defy everything to take her out of the palace, the place you called a prison." Why? Why, you ask? Charles Lee, you should have understood your responsibility as the crown prince. But you chose to abandon it for a woman. As for my young family, we were innocent, yet you looked down on us from the start. I simply gave you entirely to the woman you loved, that was how I achieved my goal. Charles Lee gave a bitter smile. "Diana Young, I know I wronged you. Must you speak such painful words?" "These are not painful words, they are the truth, Charles Lee." He grabbed my hand. "Lucas has ascended the throne. I now despise life outside the palace. Let us reunite, the three of us, shall we? Victor Wade and Vivian's son seem to be living quite blissfully now, don't they?" He froze. "You." I continued. "Victor Wade, after all, comes from a lineage of martial generals and grew up alongside Vivian Sunday. The bond between them runs deep, making it nearly impossible to sever. You, on the other hand, have lived a life of luxury since childhood, never having to lift a finger. No matter how great your love may be, life outside the palace requires self-reliance. How could that ever compare to the stability Victor Wade offers her?" Charles Lee's voice trembled with emotion. "Why are you so calculating? Why, in the end, are you doing this?" "All my calculations are based on the truth within your heart. You willingly stepped into this game yourself." Nanny Martha presented a cup of poisoned wine. "Charles Lee, if you had obediently stayed away from the capital, I wouldn't have intended to kill you. But now that Lucas has solidified his control over the court, I cannot allow my son to face any danger. Your coffin is already prepared at Eastern Mausoleum. If you die today, I will send you to the place where you belong." I saw Charles Lee's eyes redden, filled with emotion. "Do you truly have no feelings left for me?" I laughed, as though I had just heard a ridiculous joke. On our wedding night, even if there had been a shred of affection, it vanished long ago. That night, the moon was so bright that all I could see was you and Vivian's son as a perfect pair of lovebirds. I realized my place early on. Every man for himself, Charles Lee, you have no right to say such things to me. Nanny Martha pushed the cup of wine toward him. He hesitated for a moment before taking it and drinking it all in one go. His eyes flickered with regret and tears. I could have sat on the throne. It was supposed to be mine. I placed a finger on his lips to stop him, but you've already severed your own path with your own hands. When the drug took effect, Charles Lee passed out. I ordered my people to take him to a secluded manor under my name. In that cup of wine, I had mixed a potion that erases memories. When he wakes up, he will be nothing more than an ordinary farmer, forgetting everything about his past. This potion has no antidote. I wanted him, once a noble prince, to become a small, insignificant sparrow, forever unable to return to the imperial palace. The carriage swayed gently, the moonlight as brilliant as it had been that night, and the vehicle carrying him continued westward. We will never meet again. And I, with hands untainted by blood, will proudly sit on the throne as the Empress Dowager, enjoying a life of luxury and power. A few days later, Emily returned from outside the capital and reported, "Your Majesty, this servant has informed Victor Wade and Vivian's son that Charles Lee hanged himself in despair outside the capital." I held a vase, trimming away the excess branches and leaves with scissors. If they're smart, they'll understand that the matter of Charles Lee must never be revealed. Should they betray me one day, I will ensure they die without burial. The people at the manor regularly send updates about Charles Lee. They said that after he woke up, he had forgotten everything, becoming an ordinary farmer. He married a cook and lived a peaceful life. For the rest of his days, he will never know that he was once the crown prince of the Eastern Palace, destined to rule the world and receive the reverence of all. Furthermore, to eliminate any future threats, I ensured he could no longer father children. Under my guidance, my son, Lucas Lee, grew to be decisive and courageous, governing the court with sharp acumen while never staining his hands with blood. Everyone praises Lucas Lee as a benevolent king, one who loves his people and cherishes his officials. Yet, no one knows that he once schemed with the ministers to achieve his goals. To protect the prosperity of the young family, my father retired and returned to his homeland, while my elder brother and third sister personally took to the battlefield to demonstrate their loyalty. The young family understands well that any emperor despises the overreach of external relatives, so we have always maintained our boundaries, earning Lucas Lee's deep respect. I had never intended for another daughter of the young family to enter the palace, but unexpectedly, Lucas Lee and my niece, Mia Young, grew up together and developed a profound affection for one another. After Lucas Lee's marriage, the palace finally welcomed other women. All were daughters of noble families, each possessing remarkable beauty. My youth has long since passed, but I have no regrets about the choices I made back then. Sitting in the serene Compassion Palace, I watch wave after wave of young, vibrant women entering the court. Each has her own plans, her own ambitions for her family. They dream of gaining favor, but once they reduce themselves to mere pawns in the struggle for affection, they lose the essence of who they truly are. Mia Young was incredibly intelligent, she understood her responsibilities as an empress. Like a gentle stream, she gradually softened Lucas Lee's temperament. Her methods were highly skillful, ensuring she never got entangled in the bloodshed of the inner palace. Sitting on the Empress's throne, she appeared like an ethereal fairy. "Aunt, Mia knows clearly what she should and should not do." I smiled, suddenly recalling the scene when I first entered the palace. My aunt had spoken to me in a tone that was both gentle and sharp. "Mia, do you know? I initially didn't want any daughters of the Young family to enter the palace anymore." Mia Young smiled mischievously, her eyes sparkling with confidence. "Aunt, in the future, every emperor of Great Chu will carry the blood of the Young family." Her smile was soft, but carried the pride and determination of someone who understood her position and the future she envisioned. Chapter 6. When I had grown old, Lucas Lee took me and the concubines down to Jiangnan. Martha, the old nanny, had long passed away, and Emily had become my steward. That day, Emily and I sat by the river, watching the sunset. Suddenly, I noticed an old acquaintance standing in the distance. She seemed hesitant to approach, but the guards behind me stopped her. I waved my hand to signal them, and she stumbled forward, no longer carrying the youthful grace of her past. She sat down beside me. "Victor Wade has passed away," she said. I nodded. "I know." Vivian's son suddenly let out a self-mocking laugh. "All these years, you never pushed us to the brink. Why is that?" I looked straight into her eyes. "Because you all were of no consequence to me. I never saw you as enemies, merely as stepping stones for me to ascend." She froze. "Was all of this part of your calculations? You gained the love you desired, and I achieved everything I wanted. Vivian's son, I didn't drive you to ruin because every day of your lives was already being reported back to me." When Lucas Lee came to escort me, Vivian's son watched with a dazed expression. He looked so much like his father. I clasped her hand. "True love changes in an instant. When you were in the palace, you thought he was your entire world, the one who could save you from your suffering. But once you left the palace, he became nothing more than a nobleman's son, ignorant of life's hardships, never needing to lift a finger. On the contrary, it was you who had to carry the burden of supporting the two of you. You'll realize he has changed, because the person you truly loved was not him, but the life he brought to you." Vivian's son's lips trembled. I smiled. "Regarding Victor Wade, on the contrary, he knows how to do everything and can bring you a stable life. Compared to Charles Lee, he resembles a hero saving you from peril. Vivian's son, I gave you your love, but you still lost. Because from beginning to end, you never thought about striving for your future yourself, instead, you remained a fragile parasite. When he no longer holds power, he is no longer your hero. Your love is truly cheap." Lucas Lee stepped forward. "Mother, let us go." I did not look back, nor did I need to. Lucas Lee looked at me. "Mother, who was that woman?" "An old acquaintance, rarely seen again. Me and Mia have prepared Jiangnan specialty dishes for you. Please enjoy them tonight." I smiled and nodded, "All right." Sitting in the carriage, Emily asked me, "Empress Dowager, are you not afraid she might speak recklessly?" I shook my head. "My hands have never been stained with blood, why should I fear what she says? The mountains are high, and the road is long, I regret nothing. True feelings may change, but I will forever remain the Empress Dowager of Great Chu, and every emperor in future generations will carry the bloodline of the Young family."